Imagine crumbling under the pressure of NFL fantasy playoffs, where one wrong lineup decision could shatter your championship hopes, especially when it comes to wide receivers in Week 17. We're diving deep into the start M, sit M dilemma for these game changers, offering insights to help you navigate those tough calls. Sure, some picks feel straightforward, like benching a player with a nagging injury, but we're focusing on the trickier, more debatable scenarios that keep fantasy managers up at night. If your favorite wideout isn't listed here, swing by the latest NFL fantasy lineup rankings for extra guidance. And here's the kicker, these decisions aren't just about stats, they're about weighing risks in matchups that could turn a hero into a zero. But here's where it gets controversial. Sometimes, ignoring the obvious data leads to unexpected wins, challenging the idea that numbers always tell the full story. Note, all statistics referenced here, unless specified otherwise, are sourced from NFL Pro, Next Gen Stats, or NFL Research, reliable tools to back up our analysis. Start M. Picture this, if Chris Olave is gracing your roster, you're likely gunning for that fantasy throne. Over the past 2 weeks, he's racked up an impressive 57 fantasy points, positioning himself as a potential MVP contender with a prime showdown against the Titans. This team ranks among the top 11 in the league for yards, touchdowns, and overall fantasy points surrendered to receivers. To sweeten the deal, Olave's been averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game when paired with rookie quarterback Tyler Shaw, who sits 8th in completion percentage on passes exceeding 10 air yards. Shaw's knack for exploiting Olave's deep threat ability makes this matchup a golden opportunity. Think of it as a quarterback-receiver combo that's clicking like a well-oiled machine, turning potential into production. Marquise Flowers has shattered the 1,000-yard receiving mark this season, outpacing any other Ravens teammate who hasn't even cracked 400 yards. His only drawback? A touchdown drought that relegates him to WR2 or WR3 status. Yet, despite Lamar Jackson's uncertain status due to a back contusion, Flowers remains a smart play thanks to the Packers' recent vulnerabilities. Since Week 12, Green Bay has given up the 7th most yards and the most touchdowns to wide receivers. They rely heavily on zone defense at a top 5 rate, and Flowers excels against it, accumulating roughly 500 more yards than any other Raven in that coverage. It's a classic case of matchup magic overriding concerns, proving that even with QB questions, a receiver's skill can shine through. DJ Moore is a talent we've all admired, and it's refreshing to see the Bears finally leaning into that. He's eclipsed 21 fantasy points in each of his last 2 outings, even without Rome Odunze sidelined by a foot injury. Last week's overtime thriller highlighted his moment of brilliance with a potential catch-of-the-year touchdown against Caleb Williams, a play that screams, game changer. Over these recent games, Moore has delivered 2 of his top 4 performances in air yards per target. Facing the 49ers, a middling matchup for receivers who struggle with quarterback pressure but boast a potent offense, this could evolve into an exhilarating shootout. With Moore's hot streak on Sunday Night Football, he's poised to keep the momentum alive. Since their mid-season trade, Marvin Meyers and the Jaguars have soared, riding a 6-game winning streak where Meyers averaged 13.9 fantasy points per game. He offers a reliable baseline with room for big plays, especially against the Colts, who've allowed the 2nd most receiving yards in the league. Trevor Lawrence's strong play and the Colts' defensive woes in recent weeks make this championship week matchup enticing. For deeper analysis, consider Parker Washington as a flex play. His consistency might not be stellar, but as Lawrence's primary slot weapon, he has solid upside potential. It's a reminder that trades can rejuvenate careers, turning underperformers into assets in the right system. Sit M. I'd label this as a caution zone in a live fantasy setting. Brian Williams has flourished under Dan Campbell's offensive schemes, hitting 12-plus fantasy points in all but 1 game and surpassing 23 points 3 times during a 7-game run. However, the Vikings pose a formidable challenge, having permitted the fewest fantasy points per game to receivers. They haven't allowed a wide-out touchdown since Week 9, and from Week 10 onward, they've restricted the 6th fewest yards while shutting down deep threats. If you're forced to gamble, perhaps in your own championship league, go ahead, but prioritize other reliable options if available. And this is the part most people miss. if Amon-Ra St. Brown sits out Christmas Day due to his knee issue, flip the script, start Williams and bench Michael Pittman for a potential edge. Versus, Rico Rice remains sidelined in concussion protocol, and even if he suits up, he's not a starter for championship stakes. I've been a big advocate for Rice this season, even ranking him as a top 5 fantasy receiver, but the Chiefs' reliance on third-string quarterback Chris Olave changes everything. The Broncos have yielded the fewest touchdown passes to receivers all year, and in their initial clash, Rice managed just 38 yards and minimal fantasy output. If Rice is out, don't pivot to Xavier worthy either, stick to safer bets. Versus, Ricky McConkey delivered against the Cowboys in an ideal receiver matchup last week, but the Texans present the polar opposite, allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to the position. They've surrendered the third fewest touchdown passes and boast a league-low 54% completion rate on passes to wideouts, all while applying elite quarterback pressure. The Chargers' offensive line woes amplify this, and McConkey's inconsistency, scoring under 5 fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games, adds to the risk. When titles are on the line, steering clear of McConkey is the wiser path. At Adonai Mitchell, note, assuming this refers to Egbuka, as in the original, but clarified as a rookie receiver, led the Bucs in receiving last week with 40 yards on just 2 targets. Since week 6, he's hit double-digit fantasy points only twice and topped 11 points just once, indicating limited baseline production and scarce upside. With the Bucs' receiving core fully fit, he risks getting overshadowed. He and Baker Mayfield haven't synced well, compounded by the Dolphins ranking in the bottom 10 for fantasy points allowed to receivers. Stay away this week to avoid disappointment. There you have it, our take on Week 17 wide receiver decisions that could define your fantasy fate. But here's the controversial twist. What if betting on a sit pick like Rice against the odds pays off with a surprise comeback? Or is Meyers' resurgence just a fluke from trade synergies? We love hearing your thoughts. Do you agree with benching Williams unless Amon-Ra St. Brown is out, or would you defy the stats and start him anyway? Share your counterarguments or hot takes in the comments. Let's debate and elevate our fantasy strategies together.